Materials can live in three different domains: the editor, the scene, and/or a library. To understand this, let's first analyze the connections between the editor and scene domains. Materials that you see in the editor are part of the editor domain. It's very simple. Materials that you see on objects in your scene are part of the scene domain. So that's also very straightforward. In practice, however, you'll find that it can be a little confusing about where the material lives. So I'd like to iron that out for you. To start with, I've created a sample material that's red, and I've given it the name A. I'll assign that material to this teapot by selecting the teapot and clicking on this button. That transfers the material from the editor into the scene. To better visualize this, I'll open the Material Map browser by clicking this button. I like to call this Browser for short. I'll browse from the scene. This is a list of all the materials in the scene domain. You can view this list in different ways: as a list with an icon, or with a small or large icon. I'll use the large icon here. So to understand this, realize that the material started in the editor, it was transferred into the scene, and the teapot is showing up as red because it's reading the scene material. What we're seeing here in the editor is actually the scene material, and we know that because of these white corner markers. Right now this material is hot, and that means if I make any changes to it, say by changing its color, that will update immediately in the scene and on the screen. Click this button if you want to make a material copy. This essentially cools the material slot, severing the connection between the editor and scene domains. Now what we see here is solely in the editor domain. I can change the color now without affecting the scene material or the objects. I'll make it green, and the teapot is still blue because it's reading this material from the scene. Now I'll click this button to put the material from the editor domain into the scene. Now the teapot is green because it's reading this material in the scene. Now I'll go over to an adjacent slot in the editor and create a new material. I'll call this one B, and I'll give it a different color. How about yellow? If I assign this material to the selection, it will turn yellow, no problem. It has a different name. We just assigned a different material. Very straightforward. However, to make things more interesting, I'll rename this material A. There's no problem having multiple materials in the editor that have the same name. This allows you to experiment with materials and adjust them and tweak them in the editor. You'll run into a problem if you try to assign a material from the editor to the scene if it has the same name. For example, here's this green material with the name A. I'd like to assign it to the teapot, but I get this message essentially alerting me to the fact that there's a problem. There's a name collision. The scene has to have unique material names. So we have to either replace the scene material with this one or rename this material. I'll choose to replace the material in the scene with the one from the editor. I'll click OK, and now the teapot turns green.